All right. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. For those of you who don't yet know me, my name is Kim Iozzi. I'm the Executive Director for Dress for Success Northern New Jersey. My co-host is Willa Edgerton Chisler, who is the CEO of Symphony Strategies and our Steps to Success program coordinator, which just had its 24th cohort that will finish this Saturday. And she is also an Inclusion Task Force volunteer. So we would like to thank each of you for joining us for Allies for Change conversations. We are so excited to have you participate in this month's chat, Women in the Workplace, Successes and Challenges. Tonight, we're speaking with Debbie Godfrey, Dr. Debbie Godfrey, who is the president of New Logic Strategies, LLC. She is a certified professional coach with expertise in change management situations requiring new leadership, greater productivity, revised career goals, and stress management. She has a PhD in social psychology from Princeton University. And so welcome, Debbie. Happy that you're here with us.
Yes, happy to be here.
Thank you. Also joining her tonight is Patrice Tanaka, CEO of the Joyful Planet LLC, which is a business and life strategy consultancy practice. Her company's mission is to help people discover and live their life's purpose, and in doing so, unleash their greatest success, fulfillment, and joy. So welcome, Patrice. She also was one of our facilitators at our first virtual Women's Leadership Summit that we held earlier in March. And her session was well loved. So thank you for coming back with us.
Yeah, well, I love Dress for Success, so I'm always happy to do whatever you guys need me to do.
Thank you.
All right. In light of the escalating acts of racism and xenophobia now against the Asian American community, this Asian Pacific Islanders Heritage Month is all about stopping AAPI hate, solidarity, community, and celebration. And we want to state on this call that we, Dress for Success, and all of the people that are on this call tonight, we condemn the violence and hatred directed at the Asian community, the Pacific Islander community, and all communities that are being targeted. But before we get into how we can be allies for change, each of you ladies bring a unique perspective about our topic of conversation for this evening. So Kim, let's get that chat started.
All right. So you both have had a very dynamic career path, both very different. I'm going to start with you, Debbie, and ask if you can share what your career journey has been like.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, giving me the opportunity to kind of share my story. I attended your volunteer webinar about a month ago. That was fabulous, inspirational. Thank you so much for that. Had several conversations with Willa and Kim, amazing people. So thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this evening. So let me just do a really quick overview of my career path. I would kind of describe it as exciting, challenging, and surprising. So it hasn't been a straightforward path. I started initially as a pharmacist. My dad wanted me to be a doctor, which I definitely didn't want to do. So he said, hey, there's a college right in the next state. They have in-state tuition. You could be a pharmacist. So I, like a good daughter, I said, okay, I'll do that. I did that for a couple of years. I graduated from that program, University of Kansas. I practiced as a hospital pharmacist in Pittsburgh, where I was married. And then in New Jersey, as a matter of fact, I practiced at Overlook Hospital for a few years. But I decided that really pharmacy was not for me. After, well, it was something my dad wanted me to do, which I was happy to do at the time. But I was really more interested in human behavior. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought I need to take some psychology courses. I ended up starting to take a few courses at Drew and then took every psychology course they had. And that ultimately led me to the PhD program in social psychology at Princeton, because I was really into attitudes that influence behavior. And from Princeton, my first job was at Y&R, Young and Rubicam in New York in advertising and consumer insight. And there I was, they made me come in at the very bottom level. And I stayed there for 15 years. It was a fabulous place. And I ultimately rose through the ranks from being at the very bottom to becoming an executive vice president of a brand strategy, which was one of the 4 business units. And at the height of that career, I actually managed the $1 billion account at Citibank, which was the global bank, the corporate bank, the private bank, and the retail bank. So my success at Y&R was really based on, I had 2 fabulous mentors, 2 women that kind of looked out after me and helped me rise through the ranks. I left Y&R and did a brief stint at a .com, and then my husband's company we formed. But I next went into marketing communications, and I had a fabulous opportunity to work in the higher ed space. And for the next 4 years, I got to travel the country, working with big publics like Texas and Missouri and Utah and SUNY, Buffalo. I worked at private, Stanford University, HBCUs, Central State University in Dayton, Ohio, Catholic colleges, women colleges, international business schools, and I helped name the NCAA American Athletic Conference. And in higher ed, I had the opportunity to see so much of what's happening with young people and what's happening in higher ed. And then finally, most recently, 5 years ago, I was hired by another company who did higher ed as well as big business. And I had the opportunity to become an executive coach. And that was, again, a fabulous opportunity. I think most of you here perhaps know about executive coaches because it seems like you actually do that for your clients here. But that provided me with the opportunity to coach and still do marketing communication, which I now do in my own company. So I've had lots of twists and turns. It's been a great ride. I've had fabulous mentors and my role models. I know that was perhaps a little bit a shout out to my parents who really created an environment for, kind of the pursuit of my dreams, but only, working hard to achieve them. So that's a little bit about my career path.
Wonderful. Did you have, or I don't know if you want to elaborate on any challenges that you've faced on that journey, besides the constant shifting and rebranding and things? Was there anything that stood out to you?
Well, I would say the challenge, I had the same kind of challenges that everybody probably in this room had on a business side, achieve business objectives and working with my boss, pleasing my boss and my clients and direct reports and stuff like that. And in life, my mother was very sick. My dad was very sick, work-life balance, all of those things. My biggest challenge would be the one that I perhaps will save, which had to do with being Asian American or Japanese American. And that was unique and really kind of the biggest challenge of my career.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. And Patrice, I am so curious. I know we had talked about, the joyful planet, and I said, well, that sounds like a really cool thing to do, is find joy in people's lives. But I hadn't realized that your career path was very different leading up to this place. So do you mind sharing a little bit about your career journey?
No, thank you. Yeah, I love hearing people's, kind of journeys, because every one of us, has had a different ride, right? And yeah, mine was different from Debbie's in that I was born and raised in Hawaii, where, Asians are in a majority, right? So I grew up not thinking about my ethnicity and not seeing it as a disadvantage or an advantage, right? And even when I came to New York and in my early 20s, and I was definitely for the first time in my life in a minority, I still didn't think about my ethnicity. I guess when you grow up in a majority culture, you know, it kind of stays with you. And I actually wasn't, I was more focused on my career than I was on anything else. And it was only when I was invited to this gathering in Vail, Colorado, where 17 women, AAPI women from across the country, were coming together to discuss whether there was a need to establish an Asian Pacific American Women's Leadership Institute, because they felt that there's no face or representation of Asian American women's leadership at that time. And, you know, if you think about it, in the 90s, the only person that any of us could think about was Connie Chung. That was the only person that came to mind. I mean, and so I listened to the stories of all these women who came together, and most of them were from the mainland. And I realized that their experience of growing up as an Asian American or Pacific Islander was very different from mine, because living on the mainland as an Asian American or Pacific Islander, they were often the only one in their neighborhood, their school, or their community. And so every day they felt their otherness, right? I you know, that is almost hard for me to comprehend, because I've, like I said, I never thought about my ethnicity. And even when I came to New York City. So I realized, you know, the importance of starting this Asian Pacific American Women's Leadership Institute to really help mid-career AAPI women to think about leadership and equip them to become leaders and not just managers. So that was the beginning of my kind of opening my eyes about, AAPI, AAPIs and AAPI women on the mainland. And in fact, this is how kind of clueless I was. For many years, I kept getting invited to attend or speak at these women of color conferences. And I was always mystified. And I asked somebody at one of these conferences, I'm not quite sure why I'm invited, because I thought women of color meant, just Black and brown. I didn't realize it included, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And when I found out, she said, well, you're a woman of color. And I said, I am? She said, yes, you're Asian American. And I thought, oh my God, I'm included in this group. I'm so excited because, I always think that it's better to be part of a larger group because you have, greater numbers, a little more leverage, more power. And that's why, we talk about the AAPI community right now, and everybody's, none of us feel comfortable with the word community, because in fact AAPIs are more of a collective, right? And they're more of a political identity than even a collective, because there's 50 ethnicities, they speak hundreds of languages, they don't all see themselves as, I'm from AAPI. No, they're Chinese American or Bhutanese American, or right. Vietnamese Americans or Japanese Americans, but and we're only 7% of the population as AAPIs, and so I really believe that we need to embrace this collective that we are, because we're only 7% of the population. And so we can't afford to fragment into, smaller, less significant numbers and percentages than 7%. We're 23 million population today, but by 2065, I think we're going to be 60 million, and the second largest ethnic and racial group in the country, which is kind of exciting. I mean, we're the fastest growing racial and ethnic group. And I just think that it would, I'm excited because somewhere between 2041 and 2046, America is going to be a majority minority country. And so all of us people who are diverse in any way need to, stand together and support one another as we, emerge into a country that is different than today and different than it was, in 1990. But anyway, so I guess right now I'm just so my head is just so focused on what's happening with the AAPI community. But that doesn't really, I'll tell you the other funny story that the reason I live in New York City and I was born and raised in Hawaii is because of Ginger Rogers. You guys all know who Ginger Rogers is, right? I grew up on those musicals. And so growing up in Hawaii, I was thought, I was always annoyed because it's like, why am I living in Hawaii when I could be living in New York City and dressed in a long, flowy evening gown like Ginger Rogers and dancing in the arms of Fred Astaire in some swank Manhattan Supper Club, right? That was my, my annoyance as an 8-year-old growing up in Hawaii. So my whole life was about trying to get myself to Manhattan so I could dress like Ginger Rogers and, dance and swank supper club. So that's why I live in New York City, because of Ginger Rogers. And by the time I got here in my early 20s, I had totally forgotten about Ginger Rogers.
Get over that.
Yeah, just focused on my PR career. And basically, people would say that I'm an entrepreneur, but really I feel like a better characterization would be an accidental entrepreneur, because I started working for a small PR agency, 4-person PR agency, when I moved to New York in '79, which is quite a while ago. And I helped the woman who started the agency to build her agency. I mean, she was like the worst boss in New York, but because it was like we actually complimented one another, because she, we played good cop, bad cop. And so I helped her to grow her agency so that 7 years later, it was acquired by Chiat Day, a really hot creative ad agency, very arrogant and everything. Anyway, they acquired us. She left about a year into the acquisition, leaving me to run our subsidiary. And 2 years later, I led a group of colleagues in a management buyback. And the only reason I did this, because I never wanted to have my own agency, but our biggest client came into me one day and said, "We love you guys, but we're going to have to terminate our relationship with your agency because our senior management thinks there's going to be a recession. So they've asked us to cut expenses across the board." So I knew that if I told my boss at Chiat Day we were going to lose our biggest client, where I had 3 people working full time on that account, he would make me like immediately terminate that entire account team. So because I had a 90-day termination clause in the contract, I didn't tell him, because I figured maybe I can come up with a solution to avoid terminating 3 of my dear and talented colleagues. But at the end of the day, the only solution I could come up with was that I was going to have to spin off our subsidiary, set it up as an independent PR agency where I was the CEO, and I could elect not to fire those 3 colleagues. That's the only reason that I did this. So 12 of my colleagues followed me in a management buyback, and we created PT and Company as an employee-owned agency owned by the 13 of us involved in the buyback. And that's how we grew the business. And really, I mean, our biggest challenge was that we were a no-name startup agency in a city with thousands of established PR agencies, and a country where there are tens of thousands of established PR agencies. So I felt that we needed to distinguish ourselves in some way inexpensive. So I thought, okay, maybe we just communicate in a succinct statement, what we were committed to doing as an agency and how we served the community at large. So we came up with PT and Company is committed to creating great work, a great workplace, and great communities that work, i.e. healthy, sustainable communities within and beyond our workplace. Well, that today would be called a business purpose. So within 8 years, we had um, gotten a lot of great clients and a lot of new employees, and we were recognized as the #1 most creative PR agency in the whole country and the #2 best place to work. Now, at the time, I didn't realize that, I just thought, well, of course, we worked hard, we were creative, smart, resourceful people, but I didn't realize till many years later the power of a business purpose to focus and drive an organization to accomplish what they say matters most. So that's how we grew. And then, I sold our agency to another agency and then to another agency. And at the last agency I left was one of the top 10 largest independent PR firms in the country and the largest employee-owned PR agency with 240 employee owners.
Wow.
And at that point, I decided, you know what, I think I'm going to leave PR because I've been doing this for 35 plus years. I want to do something different. So I didn't know exactly what, but in thinking about my life and career, I realized the 2 most important things I ever did was to articulate our business purpose for PT and Company, and then some years later, discover and articulate my own life purpose. And then I began to actively live that purpose. And my purpose, and I'm still living it 20 years later, is to choose joy in my life every day, to be mindful of that joy and to share that joy with others. It's a 3-part purpose: choose joy, be mindful of it, and share it with others. And so if I can live every day this way, I know I'm on a good path. And so you can see that some years later in 2015, when I started Joyful Planet, it was an outgrowth of that, living my purpose, right?
Really, it's the culmination of your whole career and everything that, and continuing to live that purpose. So,
Yeah, exactly. So I'm all about purpose, individual purpose
Wow.
your
and
career
organization.
journey kind of went all over the place. So
I know.
exciting.
Well, that's
It's
good.
life.
So it's never a straight line, right?
Right.
We always try to think that our career path
Right.
set out this way, and it ends up a whole different journey. So thank you for sharing that, Patrice and Debbie. That was amazing, amazing. Thank you. Wow. I need to add, I'm going to switch gears now, from our conversation about our journeys, and let's talk about, from your perspective and your experiences, about what's happening now in this country and what has you've seen in the past when we're talking in terms of stereotypes and we're talking in terms of racism and sexism. I know, coming from my own perspective as a Black female, having experienced certain things during my career, what do you see that as paralleling right now in that space within the Asian community, as well as the Pacific Islander community? And I'll start off with Debbie.
Okay, well, I guess what I would say in response to that is that for me, what's happening now has been happening for me, in my experience, in several different decades.
Okay.
And so if I could take one quick step back, and just talk about my experiences, and you'll see that perhaps what I'm feeling now, or what the AAPI community is experiencing now, is something that they've experienced in the past, but it's never been given notice as much.
Uh-huh.
Would that be okay?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So there are 2 things that are kind of relevant to my story. One is my dad's experience, and then it is my experience. And I've had a conversation with Patrice, and our kind of growing up experiences were very different. My father, I always say the biggest thing in my life happened 10 years before I was born, and that was the bombing of Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. And as a result of that horrific event for Americans, President Roosevelt issued an executive order 9066 that relocated 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast and placed them into 10 camps inland, kind of a little bit west of that and all the way to the Midwest. My father at the time was 15 years old with his mother and he lived in Pismo Beach, California. So he was directly affected. And perhaps you know of this story, perhaps you don't, so I'll just make it very quick. But the Japanese Americans, 120,000 of which 70,000 were actually Americans that had been born in the United States, but they looked Japanese or seemed Japanese. You had basically a week when the government identified you as Japanese, like in California, you had a week to sell your house, sell or give away all of your possessions, your house, your car, if you had a farm or whatever. And you could only take to these camps what you could carry, a suitcase full. These camps were literally, they were put together very spontaneously, like the one in Poston, Arizona, which is where my father was and his family, literally was supposed to house 17,000 Japanese Americans. It was put together with three parts of it. The first part was put together literally in 3 weeks, and the other two parts put together over 3 months, and it held 17,000 Japanese Americans. They were army barracks. There was barbed wire around these army barracks. There was a room for a family. There was a latrine that was totally public, no private stalls. There was a shower room, totally public. And many of the camps not only had barbed wire, but they had a post with armed guards at the top. Poston, where my father was so remote in Arizona, they didn't even need any kind of armed guards. So anyway, my father grew up, he was there for 3 years. His oldest brother actually enlisted in the US Army. His next oldest brother was there at the camp for about a year and then went to college, Park College in Kansas City, Missouri, where one of only 3 colleges that allowed Japanese Americans to go to college, and they only allowed 8 people. Unfortunately, my grandmother, my dad's mom, had a stroke and passed away in camp because there were no medical facilities. And so these situations were, as you can imagine, pretty horrific. But after the war, right toward the end of the war, my uncle asked my dad to come out to Kansas City and to go to Park College, which my dad ended up doing. My grandfather went back to Pismo Beach and actually got his house back that he had given to someone. But my father relocated to Kansas City and never went back to California after that. And the amazing thing, if you talk to Japanese Americans, my father's generation, they didn't talk about this. So we as his kids would ask, tell us about that situation, because, even it didn't appear in history books in the United States for a very long time.
Right.
But he wouldn't talk to us. He might talk about a few facts, but they would never talk about feelings. But it ended up showing up in the way they raised us. So they never talked about the experience, but they used those experiences to raise us in a different way. So for example, my home was described as a safe haven. The world out there is going to be hostile and not friendly to you. But here, you're safe, you're protected, you're nurtured, you're supported. Bring your problems home. Don't worry what people say about you. Don't get in trouble. There were a list of to-dos that were to keep us safe from the outside world. Don't get in trouble because people will look at your face and they're going to remember who you are and they're going to put you in jail. Don't disgrace the family name. Don't call attention to yourself because in Japanese culture, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. So you're never to call, bring attention to yourself. Don't use your race as an excuse. Don't make people feel sorry for you. You're on your own to make your own. And go to college, because we've experienced that the government can come in and take away everything and relocate you, but they can't take what's in your mind. So you will go to college and you will get educated and you will have a profession so that you can take care of yourself. Be good to other people and be a good American, because I think they were all trying to justify the fact that the government had done this to them, even though they were Americans. My father was born in California. My mother was born in Nebraska. So they, in fact, were Americans. So that was the influence of the war, was based on a little bit on the way my parents raised me. But my own experience, which is really how this relates to today, I was born shortly after World War II, and my father was in Kansas City. There were 5 Japanese families and no African-American or Black families in the suburbs where I lived. So I was incredibly visible. And I remember from the time I was very young that little kids would point me out in the grocery store. Look at her. Who is she? What is, they had never seen anything like me. And men who had been in the war, and now I understand it, but would walk up to me and say, we killed you in the war, or we beat you in the war. Now, of course, I was not Japanese. I was 5. I didn't know what war they were talking about because my parents never talked about the war. So from the very beginning of my life, I have been stereotyped as the enemy. And the hatred that people had for the Japanese based on Pearl Harbor, which I totally get as an adult, was really directed at me. And the issue, because I was taught not to hate anybody back, but the issue with looking different, and especially because that was reinforced for me, unlike Patrice, who was part of the majority, I was really part of the minority. The issue with looking different is that people think they know you before they even talk to you. They look at you, they see that you're Asian, and they think they know you. They think that, for example, they assume you weren't born here. They assume you're not from here. So when people walk up to you and say, first thing, where were you born? Now, how many other people, when somebody approaches you, say, where were you born? You usually say, where are you from?
Right.
When I would say I'm from Kansas City, they say, no, where were you really from?
Yep.
Again, I'm really from Kansas City. Oh, well, you didn't have an accent. Or assume, funny enough, that I know Kung Fu. I don't know Kung Fu. That comes from the movies. Or that you all look the same, and so you all must be the same. But as Patrice said, no, there are many, 50 to 70 different ethnicities of Asians in the United States. And constantly, periodically being reminded that I'm the enemy, not just after World War II, but in the 80s when Japan started gaining world prominence behind Sony and taking over banks and stuff like that, and coming into New York and taking up land. You are a foreigner, you're taking away jobs, go home. And today, again, now go home is a common, stereotype based on, what a lot of leaders have actually, supported. Go home is you brought the virus here. We're not wanting you, go home. So again, it's like an enemy, retreat. And the other thing for Asians, but for all minorities is, especially Asians, you're not the right minority. So you're not disadvantaged, which is absolutely not true. And they say that of the Asian population, there is the largest disparity in income. Yes, they do have some that are very capable, but a lot of them don't. And so a lot of places will discriminate I'm not disparaging anyone, but Black and brown, we want disadvantaged minorities, which is, of course, a terrible insult to say that, but not yellow, not you, you're not disadvantaged. So even a place like Harvard can say, oh, they're all the same, we don't want them, or oh, they're over excelling, we don't want them. So many ways that Asian Americans are discriminated against. And permission these days, you know, the stereotype, the stigmatism is endorsed. So it goes from, we don't like you, we think you're the enemy, you're the outsider. Saying it is one thing, and then acting on it, which is what's happening today, is the really scary part. Because saying it and then microaggressions, which don't feel like microaggressions if it's happening to you, and then moving on to acts of physical violence and even shooting. So we now, you know, are in a really bad place, I think. And what I, based on my parents' upbringing and based on having lived with this my whole life, but having, and I will say too, not everyone is like this, obviously. Only a small portion are like this, and only a small portion of people have approached me in the way that kind of I've described. You learn to get a very thick skin, a tough skin, and you let it roll off and you make the decision. Do I educate or do I just ignore? You strive, you know, like everybody else, you shoot for the stars and you work really hard to do that, but you know that you could be disappointed because you're going to be discriminated, you know, from. You're self-reliant, and but you can't close yourself off from having good friends. And ultimately, you have to rise above the negativity. You have to believe, like I believe in the golden rule, which is do unto others as they would have you, as you would have them do unto you. You have to believe in what is common and what is good about people. Otherwise, this discrimination and all of that would just be overwhelming.
All right, Debbie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that story. I can completely relate to what you're saying about microaggressions. They are all around us. And I also believe in the platinum rule, and that's treating people the way that they want to be treated.
Yeah.
And understanding that their diversity is important as well. So, Patrice, before we move into the question and answer period, can you kind of share what you see is happening and have you had experiences in the realm of stereotypes or microaggressions on your journey? Because you've had, as we heard, you've had a fabulous journey. So have you had any challenges, or what do you see is going on right now?
Yeah, my journey has certainly been different from Debbie's, and you know, it's kind of breathtaking what her family had gone through in, you know, in the camps, and just the idea that 120,000 Japanese Americans, and I didn't realize 70,000 of them were actually born here in America. So, you know, that many people had a week to sell or get rid of their belongings and, you know, be incarcerated for the duration of the war. You know, here's the thing. I didn't even learn about the incarceration of Japanese Americans until I was in college. And it was only because I was interviewing this Japanese American entrepreneur. I had this job because I was a journalism major, and I got myself a job doing weekly features of you know, people I wanted to meet in the JA community. And so he just matter-of-factly mentioned that he was going to school on the mainland, and he got stuck there during the war, and he was incarcerated. And it's like, what? And that's how I learned about the Japanese American incarcerated in concentration camps during World War II. And, you know, it's as Debbie said, they felt such shame about it that they never talked about it, nor was it written about in history books. So I hadn't read anything about it. It's only been in recent decades that we, you know, this is even in the history books. And I think that example is a perfect example of how historically and culturally Asian Americans have just kept their heads down and soldiered on in the face of racial injustice and violence. And because of that, remaining silent for so long, that a lot of people don't understand, you know, the history of hate and violence that is the, you know, Asian American experience. And I think at this time, you know, we can no longer, you know, be the model minority and just, you know, kind of just not complain, you know, just go along, because that is not how this is going, that's not how we are all together going to help stop AAPI hate. And I'm actually glad.
And I think, Patrice, you're absolutely on point.
Yeah.
You're getting ready to steal Kim's question.
Yes.
Kim is getting ready to ask that question to you and Debbie about what next. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes. So my dad was a history teacher.
Mhm.
And one of the things that he really ingrained in us is that if you don't learn from history, you're going to
Right.
be condemned to repeating it. And so my question is, how do you believe that individuals and organizations like ours can demand action and create change against Asian racism?
Yeah.
What can we do?
Yeah. Well, I think having discussions like this is a start, right? Where you're even allowing Debbie and myself to share our stories. And Debbie told me this is the first time she's ever shared her personal experiences, because that's not the Asian American way, right? To be, you know, pouring your heart out and telling everything that's happened. So, but more of that has to happen so that other people, non-AAPI people, can get a sense of our own experience of being Asians in America or Pacific Islanders in America. So having conversations like this where people can, where we can be seen and heard, and where we can share our experience and people can learn, I think that is a start. And also, I know all of you probably have friends or colleagues who are AAPI, and I hope that you've reached out to them, especially, you know, in the aftermath of the Atlanta spa shootings, because I got to tell you that as much as I said that I was not focused on my Asian, you know, ethnicity, when Atlanta happened, it was, you know, like a punch to the gut. I realized all of a sudden that Asians and Asian women were being hunted and killed. And I was surprised that not too many of my friends reached out to me to see how I was doing. So I felt very alone and in my own bubble and very disconnected from everything that was going on. And I actually wrote about it, and people started reaching out to me and saying, oh, I'm so sorry. Because here's what they would say to me. It's like, basically they didn't want to say this, but I know what they meant. They almost viewed me as almost white, right? Fully assimilated. So they weren't expecting that I would be, you know, impacted by what happened in Atlanta to Asian women. Of course, that's part of my community. I am impacted.
You know what, Patrice? That's how the Fireside Chats got started. And because
You're gonna tell the story, huh? You're gonna tell that story?
Yeah, I of course was upset.
Yeah.
You know, as everybody was, but I turned the news off because I didn't want to see it anymore. I didn't want to hear it anymore. And I was able to walk away and say, man, that's awful. But I could go on about my business and about my day. And I reached out, I texted Willa something. I don't even know what I asked her. And all she said was, I'm good. And I said, oh, when Willa doesn't say something, I know I'm in trouble. And so we had a conversation. And it was at that moment, 40 some years later, where I grew up as a minority. I had thought I knew what white privilege was, and until that moment when I realized I had the privilege of turning off the news and walking away,
Right.
that was white privilege. And so that's really what gave birth to having these fireside chats, because it's been a journey of growth for me and Willa. I mean, we're learning constantly. And so no, I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. And I felt so bad for not asking her if she's okay. I figured she didn't know George. They weren't neighbors. What, why would I ask her? And I didn't realize as a people, as a person, you're fighting these battles every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what this is about.
And
Yeah.
one of my friends even said to me, but I don't think of you as Asian. I just think of you as Patrice. I said, one, don't ever say that to any other Asian person. Because if you don't see me as Asian, you're not really seeing me.
Well, that applies, Patrice, to everybody,
Yeah,
because you
exactly.
are denying everybody when you say, I don't see you as Black. I
Right.
don't
I don't
see
see
you as
color.
Latina. I don't see you as Asian. That means you don't see me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and we are, all of us are a combination of different things. And having those conversations, I think, that we're having tonight kind of point to that, so that people gain an awareness. You know, you talked about history and reading about World War II, and my dad fought in World War II. But the whole thing, even now when we're reading history, we have to stop and think, how true is the history?
Yeah.
Because history has been told in a way that we are now, our eyes are open to see, well, that's not really how it happened.
Right.
Right.
You know, and this is what our Asian and Pacific Island community is feeling right now. Like next month, we're going to talk about the LGBTQ community and what they're dealing with. You know, we talked about Black Lives Matter back in February. These experiences that we're having, and particularly as women, it cuts real emotional for a lot of us. I know, because when people called me around George Floyd, I've reached out to my Asian community friends and say, are you all right? And let's talk, because I know how I was feeling.
Right. Right.
You know, and I think that's important. Debbie, tell us some any suggestions you have for us as to what we can do.
Yes. Well, I would certainly agree with everything that Patrice said and that you said. I think, first of all, AAPI groups need to unite, because as we said before, they're just like all disparate. So there needs to be coalitions to, need to create coalitions within the AAPI group to be a bigger group. I think AAPI needs to create allyship with other groups like Blacks and Browns. I mean, we are all human beings, and this is happening on some level to all of us. So if we could create strong allyship with other people of color, and I wish there was a better term than that, because I think, it doesn't really do it justice. So AAPI groups need to unite, allyship. There are foundations now that are being created to provide resources, because we need to do research, we need to do education. I just learned of one the other day called TAAF, the Asian American Foundation, which is being supported by a lot of big companies and a lot of very high profile Asians. We need to support legislation Like the Senate passed a bill that targets anti-Asian hate crimes. It passed 94-1.
Shocking, right? Yeah.
Shocking, really shocking. And then above and beyond that, it's what can we do? We need to address the system. So you need those bigger entities to kind of go after the system. But then what can we do individually? So if I share my example, I allow you to share your example, which is what's happening here. Dress for Success, an amazing place for that to happen. Encourage belongingness, prosperity, and permission to be ourselves. And I love this quote by Kofi Annan, who's the General Secretary of the UN, was, our mission is to confront ignorance with knowledge, bigotry with tolerance, and isolation with the outstretched hand of generosity. Racism can and will and must be defeated. So I think if we hold that, it directs not only what our groups can do to address the system, but what we can do individually. Because if I show up in your group or in another group, I am the face of what I'm trying to have happen. And what I like is that I found in Dress for Success people like you all and like Will, oh my gosh, because I need cover, I need support, I need inspiration. And I don't have it every day. And I know that I can go to Will. I know that I can go to Kim. I now know I can go to Patrice. And when I'm feeling kind of weak, I can be with people that are like-minded, and we all need that. And so I'm grateful that I discovered or that I found Dress for Success. So thank you.
You're welcome, Debbie. You see what the Coaching Institute does? They bring it. It's the power of connection, right? That's what we need. And I love doing connections. That's my favorite thing in the whole wide world. Right, Kim? So, all right, hey, Kim, do we want to open up the floor for questions? What do we?
That sounds good. That sounds good. I know there was one in the chat to ask if we could share that quote. So I don't know, Debbie, if you're up to either typing it in the chat or if you want to email it to me, I can send it out to everyone. But that was a beautiful quote.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for Patrice, there was a question early on.
Mhm.
Did you keep that original client that you ended up buying the company from with your did you keep the client?
No, because they had to terminate our relationship,
Okay.
In order to, because they were just told, you've got to cut, X% across the board. We don't care how you do it. So they felt that the easiest way to do it was just cut external, consultants and agencies. So
Got it. All good.
makes sense,
Elaine has a question.
Mhm.
Elaine, you're on mute.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you once again, Kim and Willa, for this powerful, inspiring session. It's just marvelous. I just want to say, first of all, Patrice, I know I put it in the chat. You are totally channeling the Ginger Rogers thing. And I love it. I love it because I love those old movies too. And so I think that is precious. Would you please, and Debbie, Debbie, your sharing, it was so heartfelt. And I am totally moved by the story of your family and what you went through and how you have come through. And you are the, culmination of what they wanted. It's just amazing. But Patrice, what I wanted you to do to repeat for us
Mhm.
are your three tenets of joy, because that just blew me away when you said that you came up with
Yeah.
what you want to live by, because I want to copy you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you have to know that the reason I chose that life purpose statement was my life was, I would characterize as unjoy, right? Just there for everyone. I wasn't even, a front burner or any kind of priority in my own life. So I realized if I wanted to get from unjoy to a more joyful place, I had to write a life purpose statement that was kind of prescriptive. This is what you must do every single day. Choose joy, be mindful of it, and share it with others. You have to,
Yay!
right? Because you can make the choice of unjoy. People do all the time. They choose to focus on the terrible things that have happened or something that somebody did to them or, what angered them. That's not going to really enhance the quality of your life. So choose a more joyful thought or choice. And then, I feel that we have a lot of joy in our lives, but we're not really mindful of it. So if you kind of count all the joyful episodes of the day just before you go to bed, you can reinforce all the joy that you have in your life and convince yourself, oh my God, I had so much joy, but I was so busy doing this and that, I didn't even realize it. So count the joyful episodes. And then you've got to remember that it's not just about you choosing joy and you having joy and being mindful of it. Sharing joy, begets more joy. So, what are you doing to share your joy every single day? And it, actively living my purpose is what has unleashed a lot of, success and fulfillment and joy in my life. So when I work with people, I like to write life purpose statements that are somewhat prescriptive so that people know that, okay, I have to do this and this and this, and it's easy for them to know what to do to move forward in their life and accomplish what matters most.
Patrice, I don't know that everyone else knows it, but you did find joy with dancing too, right?
I did. That was my first choice of joy. I went to an executive coach. I'm a big believer in coaching. And she was the one, I was 50 years old. And, I was just so depressed. I could barely get out of bed at that point. And again, this was like 5 months after 9/11. So, I was also kind of depressed by that. But she said, the first thing that you need to do is I need you to discover and share with me your life purpose, which really annoyed me because it's like I didn't have the energy to do that. But she was adamant that I needed to do this because if I could share it with her, she could help me live that life purpose and bring, and feel much better. So when I shared with her my purpose, choose joy, be mindful of it, and share it with others, she asked me, so what brings you joy? And I was like, taken aback because I hadn't thought about the answer to that question. I just knew how I could bring more joy into my life. So because I hadn't thought about it and she asked me, what brings you joy? I just kind of blurted out what was in my head, which is dancing. I love to dance. And so she gave me homework to book myself a dance lesson before the next coaching session. That's how I got into ballroom dancing. And now I can do ballroom dancing like Ginger. And I even have the costumes and the feathery gowns too, right?
I
So,
love
yeah. So that was the first choice for joy. And that unleashed many more
Wow.
joyful
Wow.
things. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's fabulous. We're going to get you on Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi,
Can I ask a question, please? So I do want to thank both of you, Debbie and Patrice, for sharing your story and your journey. It's really been so, I think so inspirational and so moving. Debbie, I do have a question for you, please. I mean, it was really interesting to hear you share the story about your father and how that sort of impacted then how you were raised, and about your home being the safe haven and everything on the outside maybe being not so safe. So my question is, how did that impact you as you grew a little older, right? You went to school, you went to high school, you went to college. I'm just interested in how you navigated the world with that mindset.
Right. For me, I think what happens is, well, first of all, it's not 100% of people that are going to come up to you and ask really an inappropriate question. But you always have to be, you're always vigilant. I think the best way to put it is you're always vigilant. you're not assuming that people are bad, but you're vigilant that somebody is going to say something. Well, somebody is going to say something or worse. And what if they say, then of course you go through this stepwise process. So, you know, you just are attentive. And like I said, you don't allow certain things to kind of take, put you off keel.
Yeah.
But you do have to worry because today is a crazy place. And it's like a fire alarm. You always, the drill. And the fire alarm goes off. You have to check, is it real or is it kind of fake? And if it's real, you have to jump into action.
Yeah.
So during various periods in time, people are going to say things to you and you just ignore it. You let it roll off your back. But today, what's scary about today for everyone, I think, is that in plain view, in public view, we all have to kind of be careful because you just don't know, especially coming out of a pandemic, people really stressed out. Who is going to create a random act of violence against you simply because they're having a bad day?
Yeah.
And I will say, I know that Patrice has written about this. Yes, I'm on high alert because I had, in March, I had this super special event that I was trying to celebrate with my husband and my son. He just recently moved to Brooklyn. We just recently moved to Madison. And we were going to do it at a restaurant and sit in one of those little glass greenhouses. And, for a second I said, gee, should we be really like sitting in a little glass house for some crazy person to come along and shoot us or, knock it over? Or, we just moved here. We were going to have a yard sale along with everybody else in Madison and Chatham. Should I really make myself visible here and people will know where I live, and it will be disappointing to me to know that I have neighbors that are prejudiced? Of course, I ended up doing it, but you have, like I said, a pretty thick skin, but in times like this, you're kind of on awareness and high alert. And even Patrice, she wrote about living on the Upper East Side or wherever, and kind of protecting herself. So it is, is, I think, a time to be aware of. And this is why it's particularly bad at this time, because it's a topic of conversation.
Thank you. Thanks.
I have a comment. Look, first of all, Debbie and Patrice, thank you so much for sharing your story. As a minority, I often wonder, and I feel comfortable saying this to this group. I've never said it. I've said it to Willa. But to me, wouldn't it be wonderful to live in the United States of America and not be labeled? For example, when we have to fill out the census, there are all these categories, and there are some people that feel they straddle into different races. So for me, I say, what good looks like, race, we're human.
Yeah.
Why can't we all see each other as people? Because I feel, and I've had these conversations with my family, why do we have to have a label? Why do people, when they ask me, well, what are you? And I go, I'm American. No, but what are you really? Why do I have to tell people my mother's Dominican, my dad's Jamaican? Why can't I just be Liz Johnson? So I like to get the perspective from Willa, what I just said. Why do we have to have labels? Why?
Yeah. Well, the whole thing around race is a social construct that was created by the government to put people in certain categories, right? Which has now blossomed into institutional and systemic racism. because of those racial paradigms that have been created. They don't call and ask me. I know how I'm going to treat people, okay? And whatever race, sexual orientation, or whatever it is that they fall on the diversity wheel, I'm going to, like I said earlier, I'm going to treat people the way that they want to be treated. That's important, because not everybody wants to be treated the same way as I do, right? So that's, I think, a very good comment. Thank you, Liz. Anybody else for a question? We're running a bit over, but Kim and I are good with staying on for some more questions if you have them for the panelists. Anybody?
I just wanted to say thank you to both of you. It was truly inspiring. I actually came to tears because it just brings up so much emotion about being labeled different. And like you said, we're just human beings.
Yep.
That's what it is. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. It was a great refresher of history from a personal experience, which makes it even all the better. So I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Jackie.
And thank you all for being here tonight and taking time to learn a little bit more about the Asian American experience. That's so important for us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Jackie has a comment.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I think that, in our lives as and I'm a teacher, so I teach high school students, and I've been getting involved in other women's organizations, and in the end, it comes down to communication, I think, and I appreciate you communicating and letting us know your stories, because I don't think I really appreciated what I've been missing out on in history and on perspectives. When we think of women of color, I think, and you talk about labels of like, I've actually been more of a proponent now for intersectionality, because we are so individual. No, you're not supposed to overlook the fact that I am a Black American. I was in the military. There's so much more to us than that. And so I so appreciate that you are telling your stories in these small conversations, to where we can kind of process everything, that kind of like a small enough chunk that we can just kind of take it away. And I'm sure I'll be calling on you, because I also am a program director and always looking for people to, spread the communication and keeping the connection. So thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Right.
Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight, for being here, sharing, and thank you for listening. It's one thing when you bring a story forward, you have to be willing to receive the message, and so I'm happy that this group here is open to that and has really embraced these conversations. Our next one is June 17th. I hope you guys are able to come back and join us. And I can't thank all of you enough. Thank you so much for being part of this.
Yeah. We really enjoy these conversations. And after June, we're going to take a little time off, right? And then Liz, you are up with us in September. Liz Johnson.
God willing, yes, I will be.
As my daddy used to say, God willing, and the creek don't rise, right? So we're gonna put the Latina experience come September. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you all for being my kindred sisters in spirit. I love you dearly, and this is what I think the conversation has to start. And it's got to be safe. It's got to be comfortable. And that's where the learning happens, right? And that's where change begins. We can't, I have a good friend of mine, Dr. Tendai. She always said to me, brighten the church, brighten the corner where you are. We can't do it all over, but we can do it right where we are. Right. So I'm real excited and happy about this. Caroline, before we leave, you're gonna say your mic is off. Can you say a few words, Caroline?
It's been an incredible night. I want to thank Debbie and Patrice for sharing your stories. It's a wonderful arch. I think Willa and Kim are taking us through into what Liz says. I just hearing everybody's perspective on similar stories of challenge and how we can be allies for change. So it's really, I'm speechless, really. It's been a wonderful night. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it has been. Yes, thank you. All right. Kim, you good?
I'm good. Love you, ladies.
All right, ladies.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Aloha.
All right.
Have a good one.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening.
You too.
Yep. Yep. Liz, I'll give you a call in a minute. So what you think?
Hold on one second.